for transparency's sake, that everybody knew what I was up to. And I've done every one except for 3 when it was a little bit hostile around here. So I'd like to start with basically the things that I do are presentations, teaching, and publication. I like to fill people in on that. Only one major presentation this year, since the last time, last March, as I did the keynote for the archaeology series at the Institute for American Indian Studies down in Quebec. Down in Connecticut. Was discussing stone language as a intermediate way of dealing with indigenous spirituality and archaeological sciences, being able to bridge that. What's been called the Cartesian divide between the sciences and spirituality. Other than that, I'll just move on to coursework. I have, yes.
Can you explain to those present what stone language is as a term?
Do you want to keep this into 30 minutes?
Well,
Okay, well, stone language is was an idea that was developed a little while ago. The idea that ancestral spirit is encoded in material objects in very specific ways by activity and the way that people's minds were clear or not clear when the material was being made. That language then is encoded into the material, and there are scientific techniques that are used by archaeologists and material culture specialists to be able to deconstruct that and to be able to get back to that. It's used as the idea that there are 2 basic ways of thinking about things that came from indigenous ways of thinking. One was the shaman, who tends to look inside, and that leads to religion and that side, and the magician, who looks to the natural world to derive ways of interacting with things. And so this is using the magician's system of viewing things rather than the shaman's. So that's a quick and dirty version of it. Okay, courses for ever since I retired in 2014, I keep a series of between 5 and 7 courses every year going. These are under the rubric of the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center, and they have Abenaki studies, numbers, and so the first one I did was an informal Native course up at the Swanton Historical Society. That was just personal stories of adventures in the Sierra Madre, out west, and other things. They're just fun, not really dealing with Indigenous Vermont things. The course last fall that I worked with Vera Sheehan on was Abenaki Studies 226, Arts and Technology. This was the first and third Wednesdays of the month, and it was dealing specifically with the Abenaki culture and community, 1790 to 1970, ecology and material culture. Now, from now on, all of the courses I'm talking about, I have completely revised so that they only deal with material that is American Abenaki. In other words, any material that would be, let's say, Wabanaki, would be explicitly stated as Wabanaki and not included under the American Abenaki rubric. The same thing with material from the Canadian Abenaki reserves. So there would be, the question is, what is here? What is of value in Vermont that is completely independent from all others? So arts and technology just dealt entirely with that. Spring 2024, also last fall I did Harvest School. I've done Harvest School, which started with native seed search in Tucson, Arizona. Back in the 1990s, I was one of the presenters for that, and I'm keeping it going, working with the Vermont Historical Society. So every year I do Harvest School in November, and then I did this semester Seed School. I did last Saturday down there, very well attended, and we'll be doing Planting School in early May. And so these are specifically parts of the Seeds of Renewal project and working with the legacy of native seed search. They don't do that anymore, but I'm keeping it alive, at least here in Vermont.
Who's they?
It's Native Seed Search in Tucson, Arizona, founded by Gary Nabhan and a bunch of interesting ethnobotanists back in the 90s.
Thank you.
This semester, I'm working with the Missisquoi Wildlife Refuge to do Abenaki Studies 222, which is American Abenaki Archaeology. And so we've already done Paleo-Indian and the Archaic. Tomorrow night, we're doing the Woodland period. And if you're interested, you could register through Eventbrite at the Wildlife Refuge. And usually I get a lot of people there, very few native people, but on the order of 50, 75. Once we had 100 and some. So we're doing the Woodland period then, and that's the last of the archaeology series for this year. Let's see, probably the largest project of the last year was cultural competency training, 315. And perhaps I think several of you attended that. We had 2 sessions, all-day programs. The first was last spring in Barrie, and the second one was at the Wildlife Refuge in late summer. And this was a day-long advanced seminar in Abenaki cultural competency, specifically on things that are within the American Abenaki region, ranging from everything from the concept of community, exactly what are the different types of communities that we have down here, including the barrio type at Missisquoi's Back Bay, and the downtown leadership community style that spans the river at Coas. And we also deal with other more rural and other types of structural organizations. Then we move on to spirituality, material culture, subsistence. And so once again, the idea is what is here separate from Wabanaki or Pan-Indian or north of the border influences. And at the end of each one of those programs, I gave the attendees a flash drive with a large amount of primary data on all of these that were available. So this went to all of the tribes and the 501c3s. The same course is being considered. I hope it's going to happen this spring at Odanak. I've been invited by Chief Abomsawin to do a presentation, basically a one-day program that will track this, focusing on this time on the idea that this is also their heritage. They need to understand what is here to be able to properly, interpret the Vermont experience up there. And this is part of the work that I've done with Odanak since, I guess, 1993 was the first work that I did there, and finished up. The last one I did was on agriculture and technology in 2016. So I have a long history of working with Odanak as well. The current course that I'm teaching for the indigenous community here is 317 Abenaki Investigative Methods and Theory. And this was kind of a new way of trying to think about it. I've discovered that when I teach just material that is known, people are less engaged. Yeah. Here's more, another type of beadwork. Yeah, okay, here's another bentwood box. Oh, there's a whole stack of, birch bark containers on that slide. And so it's hard to keep people engaged. So what I've decided to do is withdraw entirely from an indigenous perspective to make it more interesting. And I use a perspective that's called the Dark Academy. And if you Google it, you'll notice this is the second or third most popular movement amongst young adults on TikTok, Instagram, and places like that. And it's really a very interesting movement that focuses on discovery of material that uses, I guess you could say, classical uh, 1890s to about 1970s technologies and ways of thinking things. And so it also is a form of interior design. It's a form uh, of clothing. So if you see a person that dresses like Peaky Blinders, you've got a dark academy person. Okay. And it's really interesting when you go to the mall, you'll see a lot of young people in tweed. So that's the idea. So if you draw completely, so it's from an insanely non-indigenous viewpoint, as a matter of fact, not even a contemporary viewpoint, which is actually very contemporary. And think about it as not the objects itself, but the process of discovery. So the process of discovery uses kind of what we call vintage equipment, like Hastings triplet magnifying glasses, black body microscopes, polished steel calipers, and the like, to discover things. And so these are all put within a context of discovery. And so we start with a mystery or a question that is kind of set up as a 1913 Sherlock Holmes novel. And then you go through the whole process of discovery, analysis. And so far, it's been very, very successful. The first one that we did was on stylistic and wood analysis of bent wood boxes. It ended up with a distinctly American Abenaki style bent wood box that heretofore is completely unknown in the material culture west of probably Indian Township and Indian Island over in Quebec. And this uses ways of putting them together, types of painting on them and things like that. But what you end up with, okay, is a completely and absolutely perfectly provenance documented object that was made by American Abenakis in this neck of the woods, not someplace else. So the first one we did was on the bentwood box. The next one we did was on metallurgical analysis of a piece metal and tracked it back to a Sheffield plate maker in Birmingham that actually manufactured these for the United States government to authenticate it because it was found and has a provenance here in Vermont. The next one was a pair of beaded moccasins that we were able to track down and authenticate that matches the set that have a perfect provenance from the Vermont Historical Society. So we have Vermont Abenaki beadwork documented now. The next one was the Crystal Lake Longhouse that was known and thought about and discussed in the recognition of the Nulhegan tribe. And I worked with the Nulhegans back in the day to do forensic reconstruction of the structure so that we would know exactly the different shapes and size of the different types of beams and everything. And so it was a discussion of that. The last one we did, which was just over a week ago, was the lost crops, 13 crops that are indigenous to this area. The next one we're going to do, if you're interested, the famous picture of indigenous people on that rock overlooking Lake Champlain at Benson, Vermont. Everybody knows about that. So what we do is you put that under the scope and dissect it as a lithograph and relate it back to other Bartlett lithographs from Lake Winnipesaukee and other places to understand what the actual clothing was that those people were wearing in the mid 19th century. And we actually have been able to purchase a couple examples of that so we can actually see what these things look like. And it just goes on and on through. Upcoming this summer is Abenaki Studies 410. This is Advanced American Abenaki Immersion. This is a week-long, starting on Sunday, July 21st at noon, going through Saturday, July 27th at 3 p.m. Starting in the morning and going through the evening. we have to limit it to 15 people. The audience is the American Abenaki community, but Vera would like to have a few teachers be able to join us as well. So basically, the focus starts with the 1 day of archaeology, 1 day of history up to basically the end of the 18th century. The rest of the session through, that would be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, will be the time period between between about 1790 and 1970. This is the time period when people say there was no indigenous life, I guess you could say, in Vermont. And so this will be a deep dive into everything from records documenting indigenous identity, the concept of community, subsistence, everything, all material culture, everything, in great detail. So we have not a full class, but we have enough to make it a go. So I'm starting to actually prepare for that. That's going to be a huge amount of work because everything is going to have to be shifted. For example, perhaps some of you are learning how to make Abenaki style corn husk dolls. These are derived from Odanak prototypes. And so, but did you know that Coas has a indigenous tradition there that were called either husk sprites or husk elves. The structure is completely different, so I have 3 of them. And what we're going to do is we're going to take it apart, one apart, deconstruct it by filming it, so that it can be then run the film backward, so you can rebuild it. And in terms of stone language, the theory is that the spirit of the person that was encoding that is in the way it was tied. And so what we were doing is, in taking it apart, we are deconstructing or listening to the spirit of the person who made it, so that then we can run it backward and then take the stone language, turn it into an actual construction, and then teach people how to do that. Another is we have a person who is a sweetser basket tradition maker, who hopefully will be joining us and teaching us, instead of making the traditional Odanak style bookmarks with the straight ends, we're going to see if we can make a sweetser style one with the, let's call it the sweetser star, radial start on them. So we can begin now to have an alternative that has an entirely in-state, well, actually over to New Hampshire through Duke Washburn and then back tradition. And the goal is to get Abenaki basket making tradition families, of which we have 7, able to actually make the sweetser star. Okay, so this is the kind of things that we're going to be doing, is subvert the dominant paradigm, was the old 1960 statement. So what we're doing is introducing just here. Okay. Department of Health teaching. I finished up the 12 months of lunch and learn for all health department and other department lunch and learn series on Abenaki history, culture, and wellness. I've completed 4 of the intergenerational trauma workshops with Kea Ganguly, the Vermont State trauma officer. We do basically 4-hour programs all day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. Last one we did was up in St. Albans with Northwest Counseling. I did the UVM Medical School Grand Round last January on Vermont Indigenous issues. And so that completes my year's report on educational things. So are there any questions?
Kevin,
On that
you
before I
said
get
you-
it to couple of
You did it at NCSS with, did you have a good turnout?
Yeah, we had 26 people. Yeah, went very, very well.
Good.
Yep.
How many hours was that?
It's 2 in the morning. I do the generalized Abenaki material in the morning, and then you do one hour talk and 1 hour of questions. Then you break for lunch. And Kaya does another one, which is really interesting. She specializes in things such as epigenetics, that the stress actually gets attached to the way that your genes are expressed. Something that for a long time, I was very resistant to epigenetics, but she makes a very, very compelling case.
Did you feel when you were there that you had people who were clinicians that felt that they would be able to take this, internalize this in their practice with?
Yes.
working with Abenaki?
Yeah, there was an outcomes assessment, and one of the outcomes that they had to do was what was the percentage of possibility of being able to incorporate that. And it was 1 to 5. And I think there were only 2 people who were below 4. In the whole set.
Incorporating what you did with
Yeah.
their practice.
Yeah.
We're meeting with them next week. They've developed a position. We're going to have NCSS is Northwestern Counseling and Support Services. That's the local mental health agency in Franklin and Grand Isle counties.
Yep.
And they have, the executive director contacted me to say they've got sponges for a full-time position, for an Abenaki position.
Oh, yeah.
And that's very exciting.
Yep.
So we've never had any.
So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we will see.
Anything else on the educational aspect? Because I'm running out of time as usual. So I'm just going to blow through the publications. Okay, since I have 8 minutes and 42 seconds. First of all, I reported last year that we were working on the 7 nations. Here it is. This is the core book on the 7 nations of Canada by Jean-Pierre Sawaya. It was written many years ago, but all in French. And all the years I had to work with this book in French was a bear. And this is the 7 Nations revival flag that was made by my students back at Johnson back in the day, that's used as the symbol of the 7 Nations. So that's done. Something of value was rejected by the Historical Society. I'm working now with Brandeis University to update Voice of the Dawn, published 23 years ago, that is still selling like hotcakes. It's sold 23 copies after 23 years. So the goal is to take that, put it in the middle, and bring it out this long. Let's see, American Abenaki series. We lost funding of the 30 last November, but we've obtained new funding. The first is on Vermont Abenaki baskets. That's in press. Vermont Abenaki beadwork, which is going to be about 100 pages long, is in editing. This will be published before June. Vermont Abenaki architecture, that is being edited. That will be published. There's one more to be selected for editing, and these will all be published. We have the money to publish them. Trying to get at least 100, maybe 200 copies of each to get out to people. A $30,000 health department grant to fund Always Coming Home, a graphic novel set in central Vermont in 1880 on trauma. That was pulled in November 2023, but we have a new publishing partner. We have a large grant from them, plus another from the University of Vermont to support publication. Tragic Setback, though, is the original artist, is now fighting for her life at UVM. There's some news that it's a very rare form of cancer that was a new cure, potentially 40% cure chance was brought over from University of Washington, and the artist is responding to it. So we have a large amount of prayer going in that direction. It's the first to 4, and there's the second was going to be in 1900. The next one, that's when it was okay to be Indian in Vermont. The next one is Just Before Eugenics with a Sense of Doom. And the last one is called The Road to Recognition that ends up with recognition. And we have, if the first one gets published, we have guarantee of extensive funding for the rest of them. My book, The Abenaki Wellness and Understanding Ethnic Trauma. We just got word that we do have funding to get that book, which is a complete listing that has responses, over 150 responses from questionnaires that Abenakis have responded to over the last 4 years. That will hopefully be out by the end of the summer. My Seven Sisters book, the 10,000 original copies are down to about 600, so it's going to have to go through second printing. The Abenaki Harvest Cookbook, the writing is complete. We're now in the process of testing recipes. We have potential funding for that as well. In terms of my collection, remember last time I told you that it was in limbo. I can now tell you the head of a partner organization is giving me permission to tell you that we're in the final stages of negotiation with getting a home curated for these. It will be set up as open storage with proper storage with research facilities and curatorial assistance for both Native and Euro-American researchers. So this will be not only the Abenaki collection, which is the largest in the United States, the Wabanaki collection, which is probably 7th largest in the United States, will be there as well. Depending on NAGPRA stuff that refers to the Wabanaki things, I intend to repatriate some of that back to the other tribes. So I'm very pleased with that. The Wabanaki Confederacy work, because of some issues with the Confederacy, I've been asked to reconstruct the 14 Fires Alliance belt. So we're taking apart the Great Peace of Montreal, which is a Wendat belt, which it has 2,900 quahog beads on it. That is being taken apart because nobody uses them for ceremony anymore, to rebuild the 14 Fires belt in hope of being able to do some healing. We plan when it's done, probably in July, we will be taking it to Seabike, Maine for proper consecration and initiation ceremonies. The last thing is, just as an aside, The Land of the Pascola, a book detailing my 40 years of working with the indigenous people in the Sierra Madre. That manuscript is ready to go almost to the University Press, the University of Arizona Press. And that's dealing with spirituality and ecology in the deserts and mountains of northwestern Mexico. I've got 26 seconds left, so if there's any questions or comments on that, you're welcome to go.
Well, we have as much time as anyone wants because our other guests are not here. Don't have any messages from them either. I don't quite understand what's going on with that.
So I didn't have to rush.
Well, stay on your breath, Fred.
Okay. Yeesh.
Yeah, I have two folks coming in from Education Justice Coalition,
Alicia Shannon.
Melissa and Jen and Kayla Loving.
Oh, nice.
Co-coordinators, but they're not here yet. They told me they'd be here at 1:45
When did you last hear from them?
a couple of days ago. Actually, she wrote to me at noon that she was going to bring a question for us, but they're not here.
Doug has his hand raised.
Doug. Hands up.
Yes, yeah, just want to thank Fred for that presentation. And I thought it was curious that someone from Vermont would be going up to Odanak to teach the Odanak something when supposedly the Vermont Abenaki know nothing about their culture or history. I would think that the press would pick up on that as well. Thank you.
I've been doing it since the early 90s, so nothing new.
Any more questions for Fred? I also want to acknowledge we have a new guest on the screen, Jane Meckelson. We can see you. Can you announce who you are and your affiliation?
You're muted.
You're muted still. Still muted.
I might be able to unmute her. Hang on. No, it doesn't look like I can. Yeah, I cannot unmute.
We are not able to hear you, Jane, and we can't do anything on our end. I believe you're associated with UVM.
I've heard from her before.
Gene
I've
Nicholson.
corresponded with her. She's an educator, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, well-known educator. Oh,
Yeah, we still have silence, but maybe you can type something into the chat. Is that open, Jess? Yeah, if you could chat it. Oh, there you go. I'm a teacher right now, social studies.
It disappeared.
Could you read the rest of it?
Yeah, it's, I'm a teacher right now, social studies coach, K through 8, MMU. I'm retired UVM faculty.
Okay,
Retired, you've been one. Yeah.
Faculty.
all right, thank you. We have your chat message. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Apparently she does know who you are.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I corresponded with her.
Okay, excellent. Guy McGuire, can you still hear us? Can you give us your affiliation? Hearing anything from Guy? Okay. My phone tells me Guy is with South Hero Land Trust. That's what my phone says. Okay,
It's funny, I don't have that.
we don't have our guest here yet. Jeff, can you
Yep.
tell us about these documents that you brought,
Certainly.
which will be available for distribution and there's digital copies that can be sent out too.
Right, so I apologize. I was at the State House dropping off copies to the legislature. So one is a position paper. Let me get this because you don't have this, do you?
I don't know that everybody has it.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. So one is a position, legal and policy arguments justifying Vermont state recognition of the Vermont Abenaki tribes. I'm pleased that we were able to put this thing together and that finally it's available for dissemination. So that's great. Jess, you don't have.
No.
This is for, public dissemination. And the other is a journey to state recognition, the Vermont Abenaki experience, 1976 to 2024. Just what it really was all about, a contextual understanding, which is very, very different, obviously, from the ODNAC narrative. So, and anyway, so we've got these two documents, we've passed that down too. They were part of, Rich, you probably gave a review of.
I have not.
yesterday. Oh, not yet,
I have
okay,
not.
okay.
Wait for you and then I'm
Okay.
gonna let you.
Well,
jump
the
on it.
really, the exciting thing is that, I just came from the legislature. People were really interested in us being there yesterday. And we were only able to give out copies to the senators yesterday, 30 copies for the senators. What we did today was I was able to stop over and give 150 copies for every House member. So every legislator, all 180 members got copies of these. And that was the idea.
We should send this to folks in Boston.
Do you have a story?
Yeah, so I alluded to the fact that maybe you were held up at the State House repeating. I don't want this on the record.
So I get there, this is what took me so long. Oh, you know this? You-
No,
you
we don't
shared
know.
it? You shared it?
Do tell.
So
Do you want?
it's fine on the record. It's like, that's what happened. I got there. And so yesterday, we dropped off copies of the scholarship guide. If you remember, a lot of the legislators would ask us, well, what's state recognition about? And we tried talking about the intangibles, but they wanted concrete, examples of what he wanted. So one of the things we talked about was that there are all these scholarships available for state recognized tribes. And several of them said, well, when the day comes that you get recognition, we'd love to get an idea or copies of these recognized these scholarships. So we said, sure. So we developed, and I have copies in the car. People want them. We have lots of copies. We developed what we call a guide for Abenaki students. It's two-part. One is really a how-to from 7th grade right through 12th grade, the college process. And it's good. It's very thorough. But the second part are dozens and dozens of scholarships for state recognized tribes. And one of the things we wanted to do is to disseminate those to the legislators. So that's what we did. So in trying to do that, carton was very heavy yesterday. So I dropped it off at the State House and I left it on the State House steps. And I'll be back in 5 minutes. I need to park my car, come back. Well, I came back and I was told to go around. I couldn't go through the entrance I was using. And I said, well, I've got to get my carton over there. And with that, all of a sudden, they're like all over me. The police are like, that's your carton? And I said, well, yeah, it's for the Commission on Native American Affairs. We're upstairs. And unfortunately, and I guess, again, the day and age, 2024, they thought my carton was a bomb. And all of a sudden, it was like, we've got the bomb squad, we've got this squad, and they're literally telling the bomb squad to, to step down and the fire department. And apparently they had to do a sweep of the, and I'm like, but it was just me. And so I went,
It's just Jeff.
they said, look, you need to open this up. So I said, all right, I said, but on top of it, it says Jeff VCNAA, Commissioner on Native American Affairs. It's scholarship guys. So I went to open it and I couldn't open it. So I said, do you mind giving me a knife? We're not giving you a knife. And I said, well, what do you want me to, how do I open this? Well, open it. And I said, well, I'm not as strong as I used to be. So someone gave me a key. And with a key, we broke open the tape and then they saw 12 copies of the scholarship guide. So when we got upstairs, Rich, and others, you guys knew that they had done downstairs, a partial sweep. They did a sweep through.
No, we didn't know that. We didn't know any of this.
Oh, I thought you just wanted, yeah, they did a sweep through. So this is what they were telling me this morning. I got there and I said, listen, I've got to run. We've got a commission meeting. They needed to talk to me about what happened yesterday. And I didn't know a lot of folks over there at the Sergeant of Arms office, but they were very nice. And again, they said, so what's in this card? And I said, what's in the card? Are papers, these are documents for the, and I thought, boy, oh boy. And you know what it is? They did explain to me that they have to be very, very thorough. In some states, they have opportunities to do a training in New Mexico, but in Vermont, they don't have it in their budget. So what they have to do is every time there is so much as a threat, any kind of threat, they have to take it as a full-out threat, which we would totally understand. And they're really very, very thorough. And that's what they had to do yesterday. So, I felt really badly, but it is what it is. So what did Roger, the chocolate bomber, what did Roger call it? The chocolate, because we gave out lots of chocolate yesterday. So anyway, that's where I was detained a little bit earlier this morning. Thank you, Fred. I'm sorry I missed part of it.
Yeah, we can't top that.
Well,
That's a good one.
Good one.
great.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm checking my phone. I don't have any messages from since that update at noon that they were going to be here and talk about this question they had. People resources.
That's just not.
Accident or something.
Yeah. Going on. We're running about an hour late. And I did tell them down at the front desk they were coming, so it's not a surprise.
Maybe they brought a box.
It's not funny.
Slow things down.
Okay, not sure what to do because they're on the agenda and after them, they're still on their way. I don't want to call it. Let me read this email, just so at least this is out there. This is from Alyssa Chen, the co-coordinator. She says, "Hi, Rich. We will mention this when we're there today as well. Education Justice Coalition is going to put out a statement from myself and Kayla on this issue being sources for documenting Indigenous perspectives on in Vermont to be distributed through the educational system. Work that's being done in an ongoing basis by this commission, under sponsorship of this commission, the committee and the report we had for
Right.
a couple of years now, closing in on it. We're aware that this group is doing similar work, and we thought it'd be worth having a conversation because we're operating in isolation here. We need to talk about this. So that's what they were going to talk about. They're intending to put out a statement on Friday. We would like to, we're looking for resources that they could share. Be sent back to them. Perhaps these documents we
Yep.
have
Right.
would be likely candidates.
Mhm.
If you have anything to suggest that these folks put out in their resource guide, I guess send them to me and I'll forward them by Friday. That's a short deadline. But we do have copies of this. That's the request.
Mhm.
And then I'm not here to speak to it. I'm just reading an email.
Yeah.
So I can't allow. Yeah. I have to assume they went to the wrong place. I directed them to the webpage where this meeting is posted.
Yeah.
And they had a copy of the agenda,
What time were they to speak?
1:45.
Yeah.
Tell them that they would be in the second half of the meeting.
Mhm.
They didn't, I wasn't told that they were going to come later because of that. We'd have to leave at 3:45, which is in 1 hour. What to do, folks online? I'm willing to sit around for a little bit longer. Since I'm committed till 4 and they said they were coming. It's up to you guys online whether you want to stick with this.
I came to get a picture.
Any discussion from the commission? Not my call.
I got copied on the email that you did. I'm not sure why, but hey, I'm gonna run with it. Because, one of the things that Alicia mentioned was that, they were gonna be putting out a statement on Friday, like you said, encouraging people to listen to, read, and research all Indigenous voices in this conflict. Now, one of the things that struck me about that is that it sounds on the surface very nice.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. Well, then I'll wait.
There's plenty of seats right over here. All right, our guests are here. Great. Glad you could make it. So we just got through our whole agenda. And
It's your turn.
so you're gonna be up.
I think we're a little later.
Yeah, we went through this quickly. Looking for you a little sooner, but you had said 1:45.
Oh, I think we said 2:45 to 3:45. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
We had just seen that we were in the last hour, so we're like, oh, we'll come the last hour.
It'll-
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so thank you. We have a couple of guests here. We have half the commission, half is online. Times being what they are. Jeff Benet, Dan
Good, sir.
Kutzer, Rich Holscher Chair. Christina Edwards. And online, we have Patrick Lampier, Melody Mackin, Deb Rieger, and Doug Bent. Yeah, we got Patrick. And yeah, that's the full commission. Everyone else is a guest or press. And also in the room is Fred Wiseman, my son, and Roland Ludo, who's associated with this person. Yeah, so yeah, welcome. I explained to you in correspondence, this commission and several of the committee members working on the project have been putting together a curriculum for use in all public education, whoever wants to use this to deal with Indigenous presence in this state. And we had funding from a sponsor for that, and we've been working on that for a couple of years and closing in on the end result. It's come to my knowledge that you folks were also pursuing a similar idea, and rather than operate in isolation or in silos, it'd be a good idea to understand where we're at. But what we're doing, what you're doing. And I'd love to hear from you because folks were wondering what's going on. We'd be talking about this and have it out, not have this conversation.
I can start. My name is Kayla Loving, by the way. And so we've been doing work to try to support Act 1, the Ethnic Studies Bill. And right now there are classes that educators are taking from around the state, I think about 60 educators. The course is called Applying Inclusive and Equitable Teaching Practices, and it was created by a large group of people, and it's all supposed to like help educators shift their practices toward Act 1 and the education quality standards.
Yeah, so we're not, that class is more about teaching practices rather than content.
Yeah.
So we're not doing any particular like Indigenous studies project or curriculum. What we will do probably in the next phase of this is there's something called the IRIS framework, and I think that it was Vera Chan and Lynn, I'm forgetting Lynn's last name, Murphy, that were kind of the Indigenous representatives of the Act 1. So the second stage of that work and the second project they completed is called the IRIS framework, which is basically an ethnic studies framework, which would tend more towards curriculum. But we haven't even like tackled that as a coalition yet because we're still focused on getting the education quality standards passed, getting educators in districts to shift their teaching practices towards inclusive teaching practices around alternative forms of assessment, creating classroom community, like it's less content oriented and it's more focused on teaching practices like pedagogy. Yeah.
So you anticipate that you are going to be getting into through the implementation of this IRIS framework? I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. So
It's
through
new
the
to me.
through the implementation of the IRIS framework, I believe the way it's written in a way that would be multi-identity. And so we would be working with like teachers and community partners to, right now we're not focused as much on curriculum and content, but that would lend itself towards curriculum and content. And so the question is, the way that Act 1 created the IRIS framework, it itself is not a curriculum. And so some states have gone so far as to like create curriculum and specific standards, but I would say IRIS is more of like a framework or lens. I think it stands for, which I knew it stands for, because we haven't really got into it as much yet, but it's like IRIS, each stands for something. And I think it's identity. Yeah. Is it about racism? I don't know. Anti-racism. Yeah, I'm happy to send it over to you, but during that stage of the work, we'd probably get into like working with teachers that are already doing this work to refine their curriculum and partners that are creating curriculum and to lift that up. And so kind of like taking what is already being taught in exemplars kind of and using that IRIS framework to refine it, to show like what are examples of how you would use the IRIS framework in a science classroom or in a social studies classroom or in an elementary reading class, so that teachers have like practical examples of like what it's going to be like to make that shift.
To anticipate that when you do start to dig into this, that you would be turning toward this commission or representatives of our communities
Yeah,
for some of that curriculum material?
yeah, I think, I can speak to that, just the kind of conflict of how, yeah, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. I think our coalition has really been struggling with like the conflict that's occurring around Indigenous identity. And it makes us uncertain of like, who do we work with? What do we uplift when like our kind of values guide us to think about, we need to listen to stories that are untold. We need to teach the truth. It's like, we don't know what the truth is in this moment, but we know that there's two Indigenous groups. And so right now we're just trying to like listen to like, whether it's going to talks or reading articles or reading news or like reading letters or press statements that are put out. Like right now we're just trying to like read and understand both sides of it. And we're not really sure if we would have clarity on like who to reach out to. So I guess there's like uncertainty on our angle. And we are working to put out a statement. We meant to put it out early this week so that we could share it with you all, but we'll share it after the fact. And we would love like for the Vermont Abenaki, if you wanted to share like 3 resources from your perspective, but we're kind of in a state right now where we're like, this conflict is occurring. We really want to encourage people in our community to like study critically, read both sides of the story, teach both sides of the story, and teach Indigenous books, teach about current events through, there's ways that educators are already teaching about environmental justice, for example. And so I think that there's also kind of national and global issues we can look to, so that we can continue to teach about Indigenous studies while we're like in this conflict, but we don't have like a particular side and are unsure what the truth is in this moment. And so we're going to encourage people to like read and study and teach the kind of like perspectives and sides itself.
My observation is that what is, I'm aware of the situation that you're describing. My perception of this is that while it is styled as a conflict and both sides, there is no conflict. This is unilateral. And we are not in conflict. There's some of the statements that are being put out are dismissive. They're not inclusive. You speak about having an inclusive approach. And what's posed as a conflict is not a conflict, it's aggression. And there is no inclusivity allowed there. There's dismissive. And then, one version, there's no inclusivity, much less plurality, because we all know it's all shades of gray and everybody matters. And that's our concern, that we've been told that not only have we not heard from you, but that there is a certain amount of discussion leaning toward this perceived conflict, which doesn't in fact exist as a conflict. And I that's our concern, is that this is the way it's being painted. So rather than that embracing of all of the stories, which we should all seek, we've got contention instead of inclusion.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? Is that your experience?
Well, I think our plan is to meet with the ODNAC as well, and approach it from like, we want to learn what their perspective is, and also ask how can this be approached in a way that doesn't promote exclusion or like separating people from community, because that doesn't align with our values either.
Yeah. I think that's our concern as well. So, I think we agree with you on that.
Yeah. And I think whether we use the language of conflict or not, it's like we could say stories like, okay, there's 2 different truths or stories, whatever language you want to use, right? Like right now that we're like non-Indigenous people and there's 2 Indigenous groups that exist, and the border, I don't really believe in borders in that way. So that doesn't impact making me think this group's better than that group, right? Like there's 2 Indigenous groups. They both have different truths and stories. I don't know if we can agree with the idea that those two truths and stories themselves are in conflict with each other. Maybe the conflict doesn't exist, but like those two, it's hard for me to like have those two truths and stories exist together, right? Like, so there's these two truths and stories, and I think right now we're in the position and stage where we are just trying to name, look, there's these two Indigenous groups, they have two different truths and stories, and we can't ignore either of them as like non-Indigenous people, and also in alignment with our values of like everyone's story. I think we have a value that says like when stories are silenced, we can't do the work. And so for us to say we're going to ignore this group, we can't really do that. And so what we are doing is saying there's two different truths and stories. We need to listen to both them. We need to rigorously analyze what people are saying and trying to understand perspectives. And like, I don't know that it's not easy or simple or any solution or taking any side, but it's like that's kind of where we're standing in it right now, in our best judgment of alignment with our values. And I'll also say that I think Kayla and I just speak for ourselves. And the reason we can't speak for the full coalition is because we haven't had this conversation with the full coalition. We have had the conversation with the core members. People stand on all different sides of this issue. And so myself and Kayla, people have been coming to us being like, what do we teach? What should we do? And so we're at the point where we do want to share a statement because we don't want to be like having these conversations behind closed doors. And so we're sharing this statement, and I'm speaking today based off of like our point of view. And like, we don't have the same exact view, but Kayla and I have talked a long time to get to a place where we feel comfortable sharing something and sharing a statement. And so just like couching all this to say is like, not every person in our coalition has even talked about this with us, and not every core member is in agreement with like what we're saying. Yeah.
Who is your target population? Who are you aiming to serve?
We work with the entire state of Vermont and mostly focus on K through 12 public schools.
Okay, so then it's Vermont citizens that you're aiming to
Mhm.
help. Okay. I ask because that leaves me wondering about the value of bringing in, perspectives from elsewhere, but let's set that aside for a moment, because I would like you to be thinking about this. You talk about two Abenaki groups.
Mhm.
Historically, there have never been that few. And really, there aren't. That's an oversimplification. Humans love to divide things into two. We're very dualistic, the way our minds work. But this situation doesn't fall neatly into that kind of duality. Sorry. It'd be nice if things are simple. It's not simple. The Abenaki people never had any kind of central government, if you will. It's always been family families, shared language, traditions, and everything else, but not that kind of unity that you're probably thinking, oh, well, this is what native tribes do. Well, not. So that's a factor that complicates things. So you can't just, drop it down to, well, this, two groups. So that's got to come off the table with the thinking if you want to be accurate. If you want to oversimplify, certainly that's a road that could be taken, but it's not the truth. Another thing to keep in mind is that the realities of people in different localities, the realities that we have seen as Americanakis that did not end up on a reservation are quite different from the folks whose ancestors felt they had no choice but to go to a reservation. And different things were preserved and different things were lost in both places. So that affects, of course, the culture that got carried across or didn't. And they're different worlds. And it's not just two worlds. There are many different pieces. And over time, the American tribes, at least, have certainly been putting a lot of time and effort into pulling together all of these different pieces. One family had this knowledge, another family had that knowledge, and so forth. You pull that together across hundreds of different families, and now things start coming into a more coherent. Kind of where we are.
Mhm.
But to be able to say, oh, we can prove that this, that, or something else is the truth by the kind of scholastic standards that you would really love to see,
Mhm.
because I assume that you're both kind of scholastic minded. That can be hard to do.
Mhm.
You understand that the work that has been supported by this commission is very much in line with meeting that kind of scholastic rigor that the educational world requires.
Mhm.
So there's stuff being pulled together and it meets that sort of requirements, which is a challenge for, our tradition, but we'll make it happen. There, for you to be thinking about.
Mhm.
I understand the desire to be fair and balanced and all that. But reality is it's really, really difficult to do because there are so many unknowns.
Mhm.
But you have to try. And that's what you're looking to do. Do you have any idea, like, why for this commission and the work that we're doing now around the curriculum, why this is so important? Because historically, we had no standing with the Agency of Education, so the Department of Education wouldn't work with us. So the idea of finally doing something and then saying that we want this to go into the schools, as you know as well as we do, that
Mhm.
there is no prescriptive. We can't say that this is going to go in schools because of local control.
Yeah.
But what we can say is that we're hoping that in every supervisory union, everywhere throughout Vermont, school systems will at least look to this, and look to the American Abenaki narrative, because it's important, because it hasn't been told. And here's an opportunity for people themselves to tell it. This is not being done. It's not being, brought in and didactically being offered by this one, that one. These are the tribes working together, and that's why it's been very laborious. It's something that's a work in progress, but we've got a committee and the folks like Vera, who are working on it. It's been very time consuming because it's collaborative. And as you know, in any participatory construct, it takes
Mhm.
time. Can I just ask you something? You were talking about like that, we've got two truths. So are you searching for like the truth? Is that what you folks think you're going to be able to do? So what does that mean exactly when, I understand the difference. I mean, when we talk about big T's, little T's, and we talk about facts, and what are you searching for? I mean, so Arunak has a story, we have a story, and you're gonna look to see like which truth is the stronger truth. You can deal with the ambiguity that each has its story, but they have a story that they basically are saying, they have a story and they want to basically do away with folks here, right? So there's certain principles that we talk about that shall not do what. So I'm just curious, how is it okay that they are talking a language of what? It's a language of genocide. They want to do away with every Vermont Abenaki because they're fake. Oh, I mean, why there are lots of things we look at historically. I mean, like, why is that like okay? Why is that okay to even consider that what they're looking to do is to say that everyone, well, not myself, but most of the people at this table, aren't the real deal. And that's what they're gonna say. And yet we're talking about the truth. I guess you founded by pedagogy, critical pedagogy, right? I mean, what are those, so critical pedagogy inspires what? I mean, what does it espouse? If we're talking about pedagogy of the oppressed, what is that all about for you guys? I mean, we should have a conversation. Right? It's great. Let's talk. I mean, I spoke to you before, but that was kind of
Mhm.
didactic. It wasn't a conversation. And the other thing is, we weren't asking you here so that, to defend what you're doing. We're hoping that finally we're at a point in Vermont where there are many stories that can be told, and that's great. That in school systems they're going to be able to learn, a lot. Now, do we think that the story of Vermont Abenaki is very compelling? It is, because it's a story, unfortunately, that has not been told. And has not been told and has not been told, you know, you know, the reasons for that, I would think that, you know, are very compelling for you in terms of like why that isn't. So what do you know in terms of like the last 30, 40 years of the Abenaki experience, Abenaki in the state of Vermont, for instance? Is your understanding that it was always a pretty good relationship? And the state of Vermont, the state that, you know, recently gave state recognition and all of that, let's say post 2008, you know, 2010. Do you have any idea of the relationship between the Abenaki and the state of Vermont before that?
I know bits of it, but not the whole history. Like I know there was a fight over like land for fishing rights, and there was like activism done around that, and maybe people arrested due to
But
that.
listen, your dad is Harry Chen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So your dad was Commissioner of Health at a time when he served under which governor? Trying to,
Mostly Shumlin. Yeah, yeah. So, and I think,
little bit.
yeah, so that's why I know a little bit about the like struggle for, I think it was like fishing and hunting rights, and then I know that I feel like wasn't the state recognition like given, then revoked, then given again? That those are like bits of history that I know, but I don't know it in detail.
Right, so in 1976, Thomas Salmon, you know,
Mm-hmm,
Thanksgiving, they gave recognition, but then it's Snelling's first act, you know, in January
Mhm.
25th, is to take the percent recognition. And then it became this long fight. The reason I was asking about your dad is because, like, for instance, places like the Department of Health could not work with us. Department of Health, as any state agency, they were basically told, you cannot work with the Abenaki because the Abenaki don't exist. We are saying for our purposes from the Attorney General's office. This was mostly in the Howard Dean days of Bill Sorrell and a guy named Bill Griffin, his assistant AG. But literally, their position, for political reasons, of course, right? Because they didn't want land claims, they didn't want to see casinos. They were willing to say the Abenaki did not exist. And as a result, let's say with the Department of Health, we had to meet with the Department of Health, and it was all this secretive kind of stuff because people for the department were scared of losing their jobs. You know, one of the things, and we'll give you a paper we have of the history of what recognition, the journey of recognition, and that one of Jesse's, the first division director, I think Eric Gibelson was one of the first persons. This guy literally knew that for taking positions that he took to work with us, that he was in all likelihood going to lose a job. And we would sit there and it's like, don't do that because you've got to support your family. This is what was going on in Vermont. Eric Gilbertson said, no, if I don't do work with you guys, then what am I doing? I am, you know, the Division of Historic Preservation. I have to, I know who the Abenaki are. Historically, I know who you are, and I will work with you. But he did that, you know, and it would have something that I think we all knew at a price. When we were trying to initially start working around health issues, right, and finding out all kinds of things to deal with incarceration, there was an unwillingness to categorize people as what as Native, because that was a political position. Howard Dean and then others didn't want to deal with things like gaming. So because they didn't want to deal with gaming, they were willing to basically say there are no Indians. It just didn't work. It didn't hold because Vermonters saw it very differently. And in the end, there really was a sense of groundswell, you know, from Vermonters saying this isn't fair play. The state of Vermont is bullying these folks. That's why, to some extent, I find it abhorrent that I see that ODNAC, you know, claims to be the victim, and the victimization of ODNAC and looking at the American Abenaki as the Vermont Abenaki as aggressors. And that's really what we're talking about here. And they've been very effective at being able to say that. How is it that when they talk victimization, and that it obviously is a very compelling argument that sure you listen to, how is it that it rings true? That's one of the things that's been hard for us to understand, and that's why it's and again, I'm seeking to talk. This is not
Yeah.
passion, you know that.
Mhm.
I worked with police you know, sister.
Yeah, Laurel knows it, yeah.
Anyway, so, I mean, so how do you, so they have been able to somehow take that, you know, that road of their victims and the Vermont Abenaki are the aggressors. How is that? How do you, how is that something that they've been able to do? How is it that you see the Vermont Abenaki as the aggressors? How does that, philosophically, or just in terms of, how does that ring true for you? Because I think that's really, really important for us to understand. It's really important for us to understand what's going on in universities.
Mhm.
You know, for instance, we've got kids at University of Vermont, and that we're getting very, very concerned about having our kids at UVM. And it's taken years and years and years to get to a point where we could have Abenaki kids at UVM. And now we're fearful. We're fearful of the kids and what they're going to be dealing with. And so that whole idea, if you're Abenaki, you're a Vermont Abenaki, well then, you know, you are the aggressor. How is that played? I mean, how is that presented to you? That obviously was so compelling that, you know, that it was at least worthy of you listening to it. How was that? I mean, what was the argument that allowed for that? I mean,
Well,
can you share that?
Yeah, I want to go back to one of your previous questions
Yeah.
about us, like, we aren't deciding
Right.
the truth or like who is right. I don't think we can really do
Right.
that. Yeah, I mean, I know there have been a lot of cases of like people saying that they're indigenous when they're not, and
It's like a national, international issue, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, not specifically like talking about Vermont, but just like in Canada and the US
Sure.
and other places. And I think like that's kind of the philosophy around like how that can cause harm. And like I definitely see both sides of like telling you that your identity is like not real. And then also someone saying like you're like stealing my culture is, and yeah, so our goal is not to decide who is right, what the truth is, because we don't think we can do that. We at least right now just want to learn about what like all the different perspectives and stories that are relevant to the issue.
And I think I appreciate that. Let me just add, I know others want to, you know. So I'm recommending Chris. When Jacques Watso presented, and Jacques Watso was at the first symposium. This was something we wrestled with because there was a sense, what do we do with it? And I think I, for one, was of the opinion that well, let's welcome the dialogue, good conversation. We'll be able to, talk and what have you. I had no idea what we were in for, did you attend that symposium in 2022 in April?
No.
Okay, so you weren't there. So let me ask you. So okay, so Jacques Watso got up, and first half it was talking about their history, but then the second half was an all-out assault on, in particular, Missisquoi. And they said at one point that the late Chief Homer St. Francis, was a drunken bum, and he would go to the local VFW on Thursday nights where he'd get drunk. But what he would do is sell membership cards for the price of a drink. And this is what they offered. Okay, so I mean, this is what they offered. Now, I was all the way in the back, and I actually stood up and I said, "Where are your facts?" And then we were given cards. David Mousel had us all. We had an opportunity to write on 3x5 cards. We had questions, for their speakers. So of course I wrote down all these questions. They weren't, addressed. But so okay, so this is what Jacques Watso says, that Homer St. Francis was a bum. And then they started talking about he stole monies and this and that. So how do you deal with things like that? If I'm saying that that's a uncategorical, there's a lot. That's absolutely outrageous. That never happened. Was there someone, who sat at the VFW and did stuff like that? But they know, Doc Watso and Molly Bunsen's mother, Daisy Goodman, lived among the Mississippi folks for years, as did her dad, Tom Bunsen. They know this wasn't Homer St. Francis, and yet this was the story that was told. And there were certainly the students in the audience, the 400 or so students in the Davis Center, who did know better though, because by the end they were saying, how do we bring down the Vermont Abenaki? How do we bring down the Vermont Abenaki? Because they were getting pretty wild, because they were being told that their professor, David Mazel, for taking the courageous stand he had taken, was in jeopardy of losing his job. A tenured professor was in jeopardy of losing his job for spouting forth what he was spouting forth. So certainly for a student, because my God, we're going to lose our professor. UVM might get rid of him because of what he's saying. He's trying to speak the truth. And that's why students at the end were like, what do we do to bring down the Vermont Abenaki? And yet if I sit here and say to you that categorically bullshit, 100%.
I could confirm that too.
I mean, and that we could bring in the very families of the gentleman who did do that, and who it was, what he did, and that he handed out membership cards. And we have the membership cards of the little group that he had started, so that he could literally give out cards for the price of a drink. But it had nothing to do with Homer St. Francis. So how does that get reconciled in terms of, weighting like the truths, the narratives, and what's more outrageous than the next? We're talking pretend Indians, we're talking cultural appropriations, we're talking race shifting, we right, all of this. But then we talk about that this one guy in particular, they started talking about things like that.
That were not true, yeah.
He was stealing, but that the Mississippi folks were stealing thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, you know what? It wasn't true. I mean, there were things that were true, and that we never have talked about it publicly because I didn't want to embarrass Molly Bunsen. But the point of it is, here we are. And I guess I say to you, so how does that get played out? You're going to read, hopefully you'll take, the materials we have here, and you'll have an opportunity to read what we say, which is that it's an uncategorical lie. I mean, it was just lying. And what they did in terms of a characterization, assassination of a chief, whether you liked him or you didn't. Homer St. Francis stood for something. They made him into a buffoon. That's what they did, right? And we say, but that's not who he was. How do you? I mean, so you take it, and then it's that simply, well, that's their word against our word. I mean, so how do you do with it? This is Jacques Watteau's truth. And this is, I don't know, I wouldn't say Jeff Benet's truth, but this is the Mississippi truth. So this is the ONAC truth, is that Homer St. Francis sold membership cards for the price of a drink, that he stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I'm saying, when we have, no, that's not true. So how do you get at that? I mean, because when you said we're not here to judge, and we're not here to be arbiters, but you want your people to be able to read. Let's take 3 or 4 books from Vermont Abenaki. Let's take 3 or 4 books from the ONAC and kind of decide, for each of us, like who tells a better story. I mean, right, really, I mean, what are we talking about? I mean, so how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the inconsistencies of, he says that this guy sold membership cards for the price of a drink. A leader. This is what he's saying about a guy who led Mississippi. You deal with that. I'm sorry, I went off.
Yeah, you are
Sorry. Anyway, well, I just, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Here, some response.
Yes.
I don't know. It's a challenging question because I'm sure there's things that are being said on both sides that are not true, and there's things that are being said on both sides that are true. And so I do think like trying to use like critical thinking and like look for evidence and look for like primary source documents can be like helpful. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's my thought on it, I guess. But just recognizing that some of the stuff may not be true and some of,
What kind of primary documents would you be interested in looking
I don't know, like in this particular example, I guess, like, I don't know how you would have evidence. I guess I'm just making this up, but I guess if someone has a card I'm making this up, someone has a card that's signed by Homer and their names on it, well, that might be evidence that that is true, right? If someone has a card and it's someone else's handwriting, then it's probably not true. I don't know. I'm just giving an example for this particular case, which sounds like it's not true. Like if someone were, you can tell a story, but I guess like how do you find evidence for things? Or like I know there's contention now too around like were the Vermont Abenaki targeted by eugenics? It's like there's all these documents showing that French Canadians were targeted. There's all these documents showing that people with disabilities were targeted. I don't know if there's a lot of documents. I'd love to see them like showing that the Vermont Abenaki were targeted. And so that would be an example too of like documentation where it's like if someone says like if someone's like the French Canadian were not targeted by eugenics, but I have all this documentation showing that they were targeted and that was like part of the internal documents and plans, then it's like, well, you're not telling the truth. There is documentation. So there are like other examples of documentation and like there was like so anyways, I'd love to see more like because I've seen documentation saying that they weren't targeted. I love to see like primary source documentation saying like that they were targeted. Like are there state documents or rosters or like evidence about that? That's another just example, yeah. Like I'd love to see more evidence.
Documentation which you need to refute that statement that the Abenakis weren't targeted. 5, 10?
I don't know. I'm not like a historian, and I don't think it's my job to like. This is for my This I'm talking about for my own opinion. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I would want to consult the historian to understand like how much documentation do you need to prove that a group was targeted by eugenics. And I'm not a historian. I studied like math and psychology, so it wouldn't be my job to determine that.
See, right
Yeah.
there is the
Mhm.
crux of the problem.
Right.
Okay? You've told us that neither one of you wants to be judging who is or isn't Indigenous. Yet you're encouraging that the people that you correspond with do form a judgment of that based on reading these materials, whatever these materials end up being. And there's a fundamental problem there. Non-Indigenous people should not be making decisions about who is and is not Indigenous. That belongs only to those communities.
And I think
not
there are
anybody
other
else,
opinions
because
on
everybody
that.
else needs to butt out.
And I think like just like from like there was I think New Hampshire Public Radio had shared like a hour-long like Native American Journal Association talk, and like there are other opinions on what you're saying. So just recognizing like there's not one Native opinion for and I think like there have been problems in hiring, and there are a lot of Native people that are concerned about like non-Native people just like hiring anyone at a university level that says they're Native. And so just like naming and recognizing like there's like different, I don't feel like qualified to judge someone's Native identity. I would probably go to like other people I know that are like, if I was hiring a Native person, I'd probably like talk to other Native people to see if they're Native, like, but that there are different Native opinions on that question. I
We
think.
recognize validity of wanting to preserve access for Native Americans to Native American things. And so that is kind of rolling back the clock on history in order to try and set things right. Unfortunately, the whole pretendian concept encompasses that as one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum is what I think of as super colonialism, which is the 180-degree opposite, which is a lot of what we're also seeing come into play.
Mhm.
Oh, well, geez, I don't like so-and-so, so I'm going to discredit them. And that's definitely a power play, trying to figure out where things really are. Ain't easy.
Yeah, and I think like one thing we're thinking about and like why we feel like we can't ignore this issue is that like the implications of either argument are like very grave and serious, right? So like recognizing like if the Abenaki are correct about the whole thing, then basically, yes, you have a group from another nation that's trying to genocide you and erase your identity and take away or whatever. And then if the claims that the Odanak are making are true, then you have a group of people who are like co-opting Indigenous identity. And so just like naming and recognizing like, obviously the two groups have different statements that they're making, and that the implication and the reason why I feel like I can't ignore it is like the implications of those statements that each group is making are like very grave and very serious and like need to be taken really seriously and really rigorously. They can't just like be ignored.
Sure, but again, you're being dualistic.
Mhm.
You know, there are kin, we recognize that. We
Mhm.
know that there are people in Canada that really get along well with the Americans, and likewise the other way around. You know, so you can't just split things in two and simplify. Isn't realistic.
Yeah, or I guess I could say there are some Odanak making this argument, and there are some Vermont Abenaki making this argument. That it's not everyone recognizing like there's different points of view and different perspectives. Yeah. But the implications of the statements that are being made by some people in each group are quite heavy,
They can
And
be pretty
impactful.
far-reaching, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that it can cause a lot of harm. Yeah.
already have,
Mhm.
already have for years.
This is the dialogue that we want to have with you. You know, that's why we invited you here, not to argue.
Thank you so much.
Open that dialogue
Yeah.
up. Thank you for coming. I think that as my fellow commissioners have been clear here, our fundamental concern is that go with a dualistic approach and arguments on either side. And I do not. I don't think that's not our approach. Arguments coming from our near or distant to the north are those of exclusion and dismissal. That is not our arguments. We never said that. And we're looking for inclusion. We're looking for coexistence. We're looking for mutual understanding. We're looking to create connection rather than doubling down on the separation. Those are incompatible. And if your mission is to embrace all of these stories, and one of the stories is that they don't have a story, there's no sharing of stories there. It's a full stop. And there is no critical pedagogy there. You can't just say you don't exist. That's not the world we live in. That's not human beings, certainly, you know, in your mission for equity, in justice, in education. It is to include everybody's stories. And this one story says there is no other story. You got a lock on that, you know, that self-appointed authority. We're the only ones. Impossible. We're all very complex. People go everywhere. They don't all go to one place. And some people stay, people die, some people marry somebody else, they have babies. All completely valid versions of human experience, and we're just different, not the same. There is no one story. Many versions of the same story. And to have one story that eliminates all the others in favor of themselves doesn't hold up in the real world, and doesn't hold up in the work that you're trying to do, bring justice and equity. You know, as we know, our legal systems, justice is something that flows out of implementation or lack thereof of a legal system that is supposed to guarantee it to everyone. That's our ideal or aspiration. And it's a system that was devised by certain groups of people for their reasons. And it excludes people because it was made to do that in the first place. And now we're trying to fix that. And if we're trying to fix that, we can't go down that road. That's what we're trying to fix. You know, to double down on that separation and that legal system that has made it look that way doesn't serve our mission of trying to address these complexities and these problems that have gotten us to this point. And that's our concern here, is that we're seeing it happen again by somebody who is using those legal rules. In case of, you know, so-called Indian law, those rules came from somebody else. They're not inherent. They're imposed. structural. And to see them used against people is counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish. And that's why we would like to be talking with you. You know, to point that out from our perspective is like, we're here, we're people. We got here a different way, but can we talk about this? You know,
There's a,
I want to make sure that the commission has the right to speak first. We have public comment toward the end. 3:30. You still have to head out a little bit early?
So you have a 4:30 meeting.
Okay.
It's like quarter till or so. Is that for you to get home?
Yeah, does that give you enough time? Maybe like 10 more minutes.
Okay. I want to make sure that the commission is able to speak with our guests while they're here. Thank you again for coming. And then if we have a little bit of time, we can take some other questions.
I'm hoping that you're feeling, that we're trying to be constructive here and not, you know,
Yeah.
kick your butt.
Yeah, definitely.
It wasn't the goal. But we recognize that there may be some things you weren't aware of. You know, so. At least from my perspective, I'm just trying to get boots on. Thank you for being here.
Are you saying something, Doug?
Are you saying something?
Yes, I just like to make a comment to the folks there that, if you were to believe that the Vermont legislature, went through years of recognizing, going through the process of recognizing 4 tribes in Vermont and came out that they did recognize the 4 tribes in Vermont. I mean, there was a lot of evidence provided to the state. And about the eugenics program, the state of Vermont did a eugenics survey, and then after their survey, Tom Stevens did a presentation to the full legislature about what they had found and all the testimony that they had taken. And the full House and Senate unanimously agreed that they owed the Vermont Abenaki and the disabled and Black folks that they had been discriminated against by, the eugenics program had been, it was a travesty what the state of Vermont did back in the 30s. And so all that evidence that they gathered, I don't see how you can dismiss that and then listen to someone from Canada, another tribe, who in the first symposium, in the second half of that symposium, lied to students at a university. And the university itself has apologized for what that man said. And I don't know how you can discount all that information. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to see like all those records and interviews and stuff, just so I can learn more about it.
Gotta be public record.
Mhm.
I don't know where to find it, but you should be able to
Yeah.
find it.
The 2022 one is on YouTube.
Oh, I was talking about the legislature's stuff. I
Their
think that's what
findings
you
or
meant.
yeah, I was curious about it. Yeah.
Yeah, not the.
Anyone else from the commission for our guests? Okay, I guess I can take some comments from others if they're pertinent to this discussion. Jane?
Let me try to say this. I'm right now I'm retired UVM faculty, but I'm also the social studies coach K-8 in Missisquoi and Mount Mansfield School District. So thinking a lot about our work with young people, and and as I've been thinking about this, one of the ways I've been thinking about it, and I would just like to check in with you about whether this is a way, is it seems to me like this is that it is a family kind of issue, or a family conversation, family stories, and that I feel a little bit like me being on the outside and trying to understand it or explain it or judge it feels a little like this sort of colonial white supremacist kind of piece to me. Like I don't feel like I should be out here judging it. Does that have, I mean, is that too dramatic a response to it?
Sounds accurate to me.
Okay.
I'll make an observation. I think many folks agree with what you just voiced. And we've heard that to some degree, from our guests here, that they don't want to be sitting and making that decision. What is changing is that the message coming from some of the folks to the north, which is a negative message, is not being a discussion among us as a family discussion, as a community, inter-community discussion. That message is being put out to the public. It's not being handled that way. And that's where the wheels start to fall off the bus.
Okay.
It's unilateral, it is targeted, and it is not inclusive or looking for resolution or healing. And that just needs to be out there. That observation needs to be clear. As you look for resources, you look to, learn, understand, consider what's being said and how it's being said. Is it moving toward accomplishing your goals, which are our goals? Why we're spending these couple of years developing this curriculum.
Yeah.
These arguments can be projected into a lack of understanding, quite simply because nobody knows anything about any of this. It's why we need curriculum.
Right.
It's kind of like it goes around and around in a circle. The dog chasing its own tail. But if I was using this example when we were talking about native mascotry in schools, big buzzy subject. Folks would say, I don't see what the problem is. And my answer to that simply is if your educational delivery systems included education on Native people from the get-go, we wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah.
You would understand what was happening. And that's the problem that we're trying to address. And to double down on an exclusionary duality system is not going to solve that. So that's our concern. It's why we want to be in conversation, and thank you for coming. I know you got to go.
Yeah.
We do have some things we can share with you.
Yeah,
We have
thanks so
some
much
paper
for the-
copies. We can send you digital. copies.
Well, that'd be great. Yeah. So much.
Citing this is.
No problem.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Really
No problem. Yeah, we could be in conversation and we have, recognize that like the approach we're taking is not probably the approach that you all want, but we feel very like it's hard for us to just be like, we're just gonna be accountable to this one group because there's multiple indigenous groups. And so we just feel like we have to listen to both of them
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But let
Also
this be the
remember-
start, the start of a conversation, hopefully,
But just remember to ask them for evidence of their occupation as they're asking us to prove ours. So people thinking has equality of inquiry.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Safe travels back.
Yeah. All right, we'll, as our guests leave, we'll go through the rest of the agenda very quickly and then wrap up. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so, number 3, Dan, kind of already took care of this. the LAOB was looking for the commission to support their budget request to the legislature.
Yeah,
That call went out. There was a deadline of Monday.
Yep.
And Dan and I talked about it since he's our representative. And I said, given the fact that you're our representative and we support the work, generally speaking, because we're there, we support the budget request. So I think you put that in.
it is, yeah.
Okay. So Dan, as our representative, offered support for that. We can't take a vote on that outside of regular meetings.
What's that?
Support
The
for
commission
budget,
supporting the
land
budget
access.
request for the LAOB.
Yeah.
In the legislature. That's what number 3 is about. Any questions, discussion? Okay, number 4, any reports from various tribal representatives to your communities? Coming events, we'll roll this right into number 5 as well.
Doesn't come to mind.
Okay. Fred's announced his classes that are coming up.
Yeah, remember the summer immersion program?
At Cisco.
They should go to that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Do you have scholarships?
I don't charge for it. There's no money
Right.
associated with it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything from COSA?
Thank you very much, guys, for everything you did for the card. What was that place?
Yeah, the card room, we,
The card room, yes.
yeah, we just want to thank everybody for the effort that they put in to make that happen
Did a very good job.
and get all the material together. And yeah, it was just a Herculean job that y'all did. And we just thank you. We're sorry we couldn't be there.
You're gonna come back though.
Yeah, we will.
Okay. All right. All right, thank you. For LNU, we don't have any big things going on. We have some classes and workshops thing going on down in Wantasticook in Brattleboro at the Tribal Center. Still not like officially open to the public, so it's kind of small right now, but if anyone's interested and you feel like driving a long distance, we can share that with you. Our tribal council will be together at the end of April. An ongoing heads up, there is a rumor proposed upcoming symposium at UVM again, similar to the ones we've talked about on April 25th. I don't know anything else about it. For some reason, the UVM administration doesn't seem to know either. It puzzles me when it's 6 weeks away.
You have the date.
Who's in charge here?
You know the date?
That's all.
What is the
April
date?
25th, which is a Thursday, is what Dean William Falls tells me he knows, and that's it. So there's that. Which is why we need to be in dialogue with other folks who are affected by this. I don't think I have anything else to share for LNU right now. Mohegan,
No, we haven't been through that. I got nothing.
you got nothing, you said that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, public comments, I think we've handled that. Anyone else from the public have a comment or question? Okay,
Fred, what were you gonna say when they were here, when you had your hand up? Is it still relevant, or did you want a chance to say?
I was going to, everything we're talking about in general is fairly high epistemology. Okay, theory. I wanted to get down to evidence. Because they were making a demand of perhaps getting the citizenship cards. How many citizenship cards would it take to convince them? What would be the nature of the underlying structure of a way of convincing them? And also I would ask, what evidence does Odanak have to any kind of this being their homeland? Give us the evidence that you have after 1760. Okay, is there anything? What's the nature of that evidence? So I doubt if they're gonna question anything that ODNAC says, because in terms of competitive victimhood, the model states that whoever is the oppression has to provide, the oppressors have to provide evidence to survive, the victims, nothing. So since we've been flipped, we have to provide evidence. But I'll bet you that ODNAC doesn't have to. And if you go to, let's say Gordon Day's Identity of the St. Francis Indians, where exactly were all those tribes that are listed as the origin of all the family names and everything? Put them on a map. What's the evidence? So as I went on, I just said critical theory demands, evidentiary equality. But I don't think they're going to, because if you put the evidence that we have up against theirs, it's game on. Okay, it's just a different way of thinking about things. Being born and bred as a scientist, I'm all about evidence. And so I wanted to try to introduce because they were demanding evidence, I got on my notes 4 times in there. But there is no question of the evidentiary nature of the attack. What standing do they have? So these are just questions that I think would be interesting to engage you guys if they come back anytime. That's the way I tend to look at things, kind of, as an archaeologist, botanist and stuff like that. It's different way.
But Brett, they can say that, they don't value that epistemology, that's not one that they, searching for, and that's part of the problem here.
Well, it's a constructivist model rather than a positivist.
Well, absolutely. So, that's.
It's kind of a public comment for them, such as well, if they're gone, but maybe be brought up.
But you're directing it to the commission.
They were saying, oh, we don't want to assume, we don't want to identify who's who. But then they're like, oh, but we want to provide the 2 stories to younger people as people who have graduated from college. They don't want to do it. They say they can't, they don't have the experience, but then they want to give that decision to
Other people.
Yeah, right.
With they were younger, with less information, or less educated.
Mhm.
Yep.
You noticed that, huh?
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments? And if not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
No move.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Did you get sent?
Thank you. All right,
Yeah.
thank you, everyone.
I don't.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
Worrisome for me, because I didn't realize.
See you next time.
We're looking at. Put down the, back 2 days, I think.
Yeah.